So we're excited today to have Robert Spinelli from Middle Tennessee State University and of course, Dr. Matt Hanna, who was formerly one of our colleagues here at Purdue, but is now at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And they have both actually written a number of books, but they have a book that uh, they're working on together right now that will come out sometime soon called Conspiracy Theories and the Information Society. So they've been doing a lot of work in this area, and I'm very excited to hear, what they have to share with us about how we might think about conspiracy theories and sort of their impact in the world we live in. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to Matt and Robert to get us going.
Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone. We're very happy to be here. I first met Robert quite a while ago because he was doing some really amazing work on conspiracy theory stuff. He published this book called The Lizard People Don't Want You to See This, which is a great title, and I have a chapter in it. And so one of the things that we've been kind of thinking about is the way that, and this is really building on the work that I was doing at Purdue and that Robert's been doing for a while, and thinking about the role of conspiracy theories within this broader concept of the information society and the way that we now live in this sort of vast information ecosystem. And part of the challenge of that is dealing with conspiracy theories, misinformation, disinformation, and other information challenges. And so one of the things we're going to do today is we're going to give you a sort of an overview and a provocation about the book project in the hope that it will spark some interesting conversations, but also maybe help generate ideas for either your own work or projects or things that might be interesting to you. So we do hope that you'll bring some really interesting conversation to that. So the book project, we're calling it Conspiracy Theories and the Information Society. And we're going to be thinking about the way that conspiracy theories and mis and disinformation impact this kind of society that we're living in. So we're going to start with, each of us is going to start with a provocation for you to get started, and then we'll go over some of the components of the information society and the challenges, and then we'll sort of preview some of the great stuff that's in the book, including former ideals colleagues who have benefited from Clarence and Rachel's leadership in this space. So my provocation will start with the Jeffrey Epstein files. So if you've been paying attention at all, you know that there's this ongoing information challenge about the Jeffrey Epstein files. What do we do with millions and millions and millions of documents that have been redacted, that are being sort of dumped by the Department of Justice in ways that make them not especially navigable? And so when we see, the Department of Justice publishing 3.5 million documents publicly, it raises some interesting challenges and questions around information. So for example, journalists are currently working through a lot of this material and trying to understand what's in the Epstein files, who's in the Epstein files and why. But that takes a long time because of journalistic integrity and other things. And what we're seeing is that there's a perfect storm of the release of the Epstein files with the do your own research community. And a lot of the conspiracy theorists that were out here doing their own research in QAnon are now working in the Epstein files. And it's producing really interesting new permutations of conspiracy theories. So for example, I just added this. It's a screenshot for a tool called the Web, which uses AI large language models to produce an environment in which you can actually explore the Epstein files using these AI tools. And on the surface, that might sound really cool, like, oh, that's great. Thankfully, somebody did this where you can, put in a chat prompt and it will give you results like, how many times Bill Clinton was in the Epstein files. But one of the things that I think is very interesting and have started working on is the way that when we dig into the background of a tool like this, we discovered that the people building these are a priori conspiracy theorists, often anti-Semitic conspiracy theorists who have a lot of strange sort of assumptions going into a project like this. So one of the things I'm interested in is what I'm calling platform conspiracism, which is the way that now these conspiracy theorists can build all kinds of interesting tools that kind of mirror academic research, but underneath it, there's this underlying conspiracism or paranoia built in to the very infrastructure of the tool. So I'm going to pop it over to Robert for his provocation.
Right. So, kind of playing off the idea a little bit, or in a similar vein of the Epstein files being released, one of the things that I've been thinking about in the last few days is the similar releasing of mass amounts of documents and materials relating to UFOs and alien phenomena, and how this ties back into the overwhelming idea of information overload and the infodemic. So I'm sure you're familiar with that term of infodemic and some of its implications for the environment we exist in. It was a term coined by David Rothkopf back in 2003 during the SARS outbreak. So it was already aligned with the idea of medical disinformation and information overload and spread during an epidemic. And the idea of the infodemic kind of reappeared in a more extreme form, more public form during COVID, and became adopted officially by the World Health Organization to emphasize the importance of trying to manage information flow during public health crises. So, since it's so closely intertwined with the idea of information overload, the medical metaphor of the infodemic specifically arises from and describes misinformation related to medical issues, and kind of gave birth or helped contribute to the popularity of the term going viral, because it's a very visceral way of describing how information can become overwhelming, how it can spread quickly without the time to reflect on its origins, the meanings behind information, and the motivations behind those who are sharing and trying to spread things in such a rapid way, so as to cause confusion, to kind of blur the lines between what is an actual fact and what is a rumor or a conspiracy. So I think the infodemic is a very apt metaphor to use, and so stemming from that, one of the tasks that are assigned to anyone who's researching these topics, who is trying to work in in fields of literacy and improving the way we deal with the spread of information, is to try to help everyone break patterns and kind of find your way through the mess of what is out there.
So within that space, part of the challenge for our book project was thinking about something called the Information Society. And this is a term that's been in use for a long time. I started seeing it popping up in the mid 1990s. My favorite version of this comes from Robert Hassan in his 2008 book, The Information Society. And he describes an information society as something that we know insofar as it constitutes a growing reality reshaping the world and shaping what it means to be an individual, a worker, and a member of the public. Information technology, he argues, is based upon computer logic and has networked the world, shrinking it to the point where it is possible to be constantly in touch with others, no matter where they are or what time it is. And this part in red, I think, is the most interesting part of this quote. He says, the extent of this connectivity is historically unprecedented, and it is something that is growing in complexity and utility every moment of every day. And I think one thing that I find especially interesting about this is that this book came out in 2008. And so that level of connectivity, the level of information technology has only advanced since then. One of my students described it very well in a class on the information society, where they said an information society is where your information is online, whether you want it to be or not, where you have no choice but to use the platforms and tools that are available. So if you think about things like trying to go to the doctor now, you almost always have to sign up. If you want to get your results, you have to sign up to be on a portal of some kind, right? We're all constantly on these portals and platforms. And so the information society describes a society so heavily reliant on information. And so one of the things that we're going to be thinking about now are some of the informational challenges that are unique to an information society. What are the particular social and political frameworks and permutations that affect us if we live in such a society? How do we experience the world in a unique and different way? And what are some of the challenges that we see? So we've already heard about two of these. But thinking more fully about some of the particular political challenges that we thought would inform a book like this. So the first one is thinking about surveillance. And this is something that I've become interested in. So the idea that surveillance is increasingly being deployed, and now with artificial intelligence tools, surveillance can take on a sort of technologically mediated sort of framework or aspect. So, for example, here at the University of Wisconsin, we just had a very robust campus debate about whether or not we should install flock cameras. And flock cameras are a tool that uses artificial intelligence to categorize your vehicle into a database, and then it uses these tools to sort of determine like what level of offender you are or whatever in terms, I guess it's for parking. But one of the things that folks were very upset about is that the company that makes these flock cameras has a very troubled history with protecting data and using data or misusing data. So one of the things that we see when we think about information challenges is the rise of surveillance as a norm, as a way of life in the 21st century, combined with artificial intelligence tools using various models to determine, whether someone's a criminal or whether someone's, breaking the law. So I think this is one area that's going to be increasingly important and will be a source of discussion going into the future for sure. Okay, I'll pop it to you, Robert.
Yeah. So another, keeping in mind the idea of surveillance and the way that technology can be omnipresent and aware of what we're doing at all times. Another consideration that will only prove to become more contentious and more of a problem is the existence of deep fakes, especially those controlled by artificial intelligence. So when we think about information identity and the ways in which people try to represent themselves as something different than what they are, we come to the idea of controlling your identity to the point where it's no longer even really a representation of who you are as a person. So deepfakes are media content created mostly by AI technologies that are meant to be deceptive. They're a sign of and a tool of misinformation and digital impersonation. So this can be a very dangerous thing in the wrong hands. They're generated by machine learning algorithms that create realistic digital likenesses of people without permission. So we can see, aside from people trying to change their own identities, deepfakes can be used to assume others' identities or portray people doing things that they wouldn't actually do in real life, which is also the way in which deepfakes can become a political weapon and can be used to undermine authorities and create issues and strife where they don't necessarily need to be or where they don't exist naturally. So when deepfakes are done well, the result can be very believable. But of course, they're still totally fabricated whether that be through text, video, or audio clips, anything that will portray something different than what a person might actually say or how they might actually act. So the danger, of course, in this, aside from identity theft and possible uh, leading to political upheavals, is the fact that deepfakes continue to sow distrust. So if every piece of media that we encounter becomes suspect of AI and inauthenticity, uh, it's a threat to Western democracy because it continues to erode that trust that's needed for society to function and for a democratic group of people to be able to work together towards achieving social goals. Can we go to the next slide, Matt?
Yes.
All right. So obviously, all the words that you see on the screen in front of you right now are kind of the summation of what we're dealing with within the information society and the heart of the issues we're trying to get at with this volume that we're putting together. And so, personally, when I think about ideas of disinformation, misinformation, fake news, they're all closely related. The ideas overlap in different ways, but the main point of dissimilarity between all of them that helps us to distinguish is the idea of intention. So if we're going to be thinking about these concepts in terms of intentionality, misinformation kind of falls at the bottom of the rung because it's something that's defined as information whose inaccuracy is unintentional. So misinformation, of course, in itself has many different forms and can spread in many different ways, but at the root of it, it is not always done with the specific purpose to mislead other people or to create a sense of distrust necessarily. When we think about negative intentions and the actual desire to make people think a certain way or lead them away from established ideas or agreed upon truths in society, that's when we're looking at the idea of disinformation, when that is always being spread by bad actors in some kind, looking to mislead people, uh, form cracks in connections, and help to drive wedges in between social groups, individuals, whatever the case might be. And I also just wanted to say a word. Let's go back 1 second. Sorry, a word about the concept of fake news. So, fake news as a term has been around for quite a while now, and it seems to be falling out of popularity. And I think one of the reasons for that is because when we think about fake news, it has a much more of a connection to the ideas of satire and parody. And so there, a lot of the time, if we label something as fake news, it's because it has a degree of uh, obviousness that it's not real. And that line has become blurred more and more now to the point where the very idea of fake news is losing its power, as we can see every day in the various tweets and social posts that are put out that a lot of the time right now reality is stranger than something that we could possibly create as a parody. Right now we can go on to the next slide. Here we have a pretty thorough diagram of a lot of the various forms of literacy that fall under the rubric of information literacy. And when I think of, obviously information literacy is a huge concept, it's a huge problem and tool set to try to solve other issues created by misinformation. So I think because there are so many different categories, so many different ideas this term is trying to address, it's more helpful to think about it under the umbrella of meta literacies. And so, taken all together, these meta literacies help to encourage people and guide them in thinking about their own thinking and really trying to remain critical not of not only of information that we find out in the world, but also the way that we ourselves analyze, absorb, and think about information, allowing people to understand their own relationship to knowledge and to on deeper levels. And so I think in order for a lot of these concepts and strategies to be effective, we really need to emphasize the ideas of ethical creation, distribution of information, so that individuals can adapt and continue to adapt to changes in technology, especially with communication methods, knowledge production methods such as AI, and that doing these things ideally, hopefully, will guide people towards less unhealthy ways of thinking, especially in the realm of conspiracy theories and disinformation. Do you have anything you want to add there, Matt, too?
Yeah, I was just going to say that the question of literacy is a sort of an age-old question, and one of the challenges has been in my own work, and I see, Jen Howie's here. We worked on a paper about this, trying to think about what kinds of literacy might be most effective at grappling with some of the complex and challenging information ecosystems in which as citizens in which we live. The Association of College and Research Libraries has just put out a new updated version of their framework from 2015. And one of the things that we can see there is an attempt to grapple with some of the changes that have happened since that framework was last updated in 2015. And it just is another reminder that the last 10 years have really seen a drastic and dramatic upheaval in the information space, and the way that people produce and share information. So it's something that we think this book will be uniquely situated to try to respond to in particular ways. And also the work of institutes like this, where Clarence and Rachel are bringing together people to talk about these issues, I think is really going to be essential for helping to protect American democracy into the future. And so what we wanted to do now is to pivot to the book project and to preview some of the ways that we're thinking about this question of conspiracy theory and the information society. We're going to kind of give you an overview of some of the aspects of this project, and highlight a couple of really exciting pieces inside of it. But the goal is really to showcase, I think, what we see as the dominant strands of approach to understanding conspiracy theory in the information society. So it's not just a preview of the book, it's really a preview of a method, a preview of an approach, and thinking through the different components of that and what it might look like to tackle this question of conspiracy theory in the information society. So while it will focus on some of our authors and some of the work that they're doing, the goal really is to showcase the larger method. And so we'll talk about some of those things as well. So some of the things that will be important for the context for this project, that we see as the conspiratorial or conspiracist orientation in our contemporary information society. Particularly in my own work, I'm very interested in the role of late capitalism, or what some scholars have called late capitalism. It's also been called post-industrial capitalism, postmodern capitalism. There's a lot of different terms for this, neoliberal capitalism. But the overarching idea, I think, for conspiracy theories is that in a time of worsening income and wealth inequality, in a time of worsening austerity and of the growing impoverishment of the planet, what we're seeing is that conspiracy theories rise to fill in the gap. So people sense that something is wrong in society, that things are not working the way they should. They're beginning to see that, the tech companies are becoming like oligarchs where they have so much wealth that they can kind of do whatever they want, but they don't really understand yet what are the dynamics that make that possible. And so they're looking for explanations to explain those things. And one very convenient story is that it's a secret cabal of evildoers who are responsible for moving the levers of history. That it's not a complex system of social and economic dynamics that really are not meant to, not meant to foster human happiness necessarily, but to foster profit. And they replace that story with something much more tangible, that maybe it's a Jewish conspiracy, or it's all the professors promoting their LGBTQ agenda, or whatever it might be. And so one sort of background for thinking about conspiracy theories in the information society is this idea of late capitalism and platform capitalism, and the way that capitalism has been sort of replaced with a conspiracy theory about shadowy actors and elites and globalists. The second part of the background for this project, I think, is this unfolding conspiracy that's turning out to be true, which is that Jeffrey Epstein and his conspirators actually were doing a lot of stuff that you might think, sounds like it comes out of QAnon. So one of the things I've been seeing a lot of is these dominance of narratives about Epstein, which have produced some really strange downstream effects, such as I mentioned, the development of these new AI platforms for doing your own research, but also legitimizing conspiracy theories that the elites are engaged in some kind of, secret plan designed to, control the world. And of course, if we really think objectively about what we're finding in the Epstein files, it is a story of late capitalism. It's a story of elites with a lot of wealth, who are, networking with other elites and doing things that they think are, they're protected from because they're above the law. That's a story of late capitalism, but it can easily become a story about a secret conspiracy of, a cadre of elites controlling the world. So that's another side of this. And then thinking through some of the components of the way that conspiracy theories spread online, you would not be mistaken in thinking, well, the solution is just to get off of social media. And what we're finding is that, in fact, conspiracy theories are spreading with such scope and scale that they are beginning to have serious impacts on our democratic processes. So this is a clip or a picture from the January 6th riot. And you can see right here, pictured prominently in the front, is a guy known as the QAnon shaman. And the QAnon shaman is one of these figures that rose up out of the online conspiracy space, and turned into an active political actor. So one of the things I think we need to be aware of is that conspiracy theories do not stay confined to these online environments, but actually will sort of escape containment, as it were, and appear in all kinds of different areas and political impact of these things. So I think that's another key piece of this.
Okay, so another key piece of how conspiracy theories and conspiracism finds its way into real world of politics and effects on society, aside from January 6th, again, circulating around the time of COVID. I think that time period really emphasized and helped show the potential dangers of the ideas of conspiracy theories. When we think about some forms of conspiracy theories, looking at theories relating to celebrities, or even going back to the JFK assassination. These are things that are almost, mental games. They're not something that's really going to impact too much the way of real world action. But when we think of conspiracy theories relating to health and disinformation surrounding medical care, that's when we can see the real world impact on vaccine hesitation, the uprising and rebirth of diseases like measles that were basically eradicated and are now becoming issues in different areas of the country. And more so than that, even we have people like RFK in positions of power who are specifically advocating for conspiratorial ideas to become policy to change the fabric of how schools work, how people interact with each other, and how ideas that were once on the fringes become something far more mainstream and accepted, and that grants power to all the other alternative speakers and theorists to conspiracy theories that we still see in the wellness industry on Instagram and in actual organized groups like America's Frontline Doctors, all people who have some semblance and some degree of authority that are trying to actually give voice and power to these ideas. We can advance. There we go. Right, so getting down to the basic outline of our book upcoming with Bergen Books. So we're going to offer a little overview of several of the different chapters and contributors that we have in our book. Matt and I put out a successful call several months ago that yielded over 40 high quality submissions. We wanted to make sure that our volume appealed to a highly interdisciplinary and international group of scholars in order to really get a good variety of input and contributions that would speak to the information society from a plethora of viewpoints and backgrounds. And so we'll hop into that next and show you how we broke down our sections and go from there. So the first section is devoted to libraries on the front lines of the information war. Matt and I wanted to specifically make sure that we garnered submissions from people working in the world of libraries and archives, because many people in this field have a close experience working with disinformation and expertise in how to combat it. So two of the chapters that we're going to be including in our book are specifically related to different aspects of conspiracy theory in libraries. The first chapter is authored by Katie Greer and Stephanie Bean, two researchers who have been working in this field for quite a while now also, and specifically address the role of libraries. So their chapter is going to be centered around libraries and cultural institutions in the age of Trumpism and Project 2025. And they're going to discuss the work of frontline library professionals and the resulting impact of information disorder, encompassing the protection of historical records, preservation of academic freedom and privacy, and the defense of the right to read in the light of the fragmentation of the information ecosystem under Trump. So I know that another chapter in this section is called Preserving and Providing Access to Material on Conspiracy Theories in Libraries and Archives by Kate Stewart. And what she's going to do is cover the efforts that librarians and archivists have made to preserve documentation regarding conspiracy theories. So she's going to cover the difficulty of acquiring both analog and digital material, ethical issues regarding providing access to the public and its use by scholars, and how teachers and professors can integrate these things into lessons on misinformation.
The second section of the book is going to focus primarily on platforms and the role of artificial intelligence in particular. And we really wanted to focus on this because it's so relevant now, the way that artificial intelligence and platforms shape so much of the way that we access and understand information, whether those platforms are social media companies, whether those platforms are image boards or other sort of online forums for sharing conspiracy theories and misinformation. And so chapters in this section of the book are really going to focus on some of the technical sides of disinformation and conspiracy theories. And we have a bunch of really interesting projects on bots, doing your own research on platforms. Purdue's the scholar at Purdue who I've worked with before, named Courtney Falk, is going to work on a project related to Telegram and thinking about how Telegram has provided an environment to share conspiracy theories, and he'll be doing a sort of data science approach to understanding specifically the rise of financial conspiracy theories, which don't get talked about very often because they're a little bit less exciting in some ways than like JFK or UFOs, but in fact probably have more real world implications for people because they encourage people to invest in things like, cryptocurrencies or Bitcoin. So we're going to look at some of the conspiracy theories in that space. And so we're very excited about this section. I think this is an area of growing importance in research as we think about things like platforms and artificial intelligence tools being used explicitly to produce deepfakes and conspiracy content. And so I think there's a lot of material in this that could be very interesting for scholars, and it should be a really rich area of research. Okay, Robert.
So yes, as we were, kind of discussing a little bit before, our third section is all about the conspiracy theories related to health and the ways in which medical disinformation work into the information society. So one of our chapters here is on the far-right extremism ideologies, and specifically focuses on vaccine coverage and InfoWars and news articles from April of 2025. So this chapter, it will investigate rhetorical patterns, symbolic content, and the ideological functions of vaccine-related coverage from InfoWars and natural news, with the goal of the chapter being to contribute to the broader field of media criticism by highlighting the interplay among ideology, affect, misinformation, and disinformation in the digital age. And taking another approach to the topic of medical disinformation, another chapter in this section will focus on the role of parental vigilance, care, and the idea of doing your own research. So this chapter will explore specifically how the structural shift in conspiracy theories and medical information forces parents to navigate a landscape of information overload, fragmented and distrust and expertise, and delayed institutional consensus, helping to contribute to the rise of do your own research culture as a primary mode of parental care. So this chapter takes a slightly different take on this idea by emphasizing the fact that a lot of the urge to encourage people to do their own research and question official narratives arises because of the fact that parents in particular are trying to do things that they feel are safe, even if it's built on shady ground necessarily.
Finally, the section 4, we're going to be looking at specifically the idea of rhetoric and the way that rhetoric is being deployed in conspiracy spaces. So thinking about, what we're calling the rhetoric of the red pill, and the way that people in conspiracy theories deploy a kind of rhetorical set of strategies to convince people to join their movement. And so, for example, in this space, we have a paper on from Nicole Mattoni, applying rhetorical theory to understand how Alex Jones specifically weaponized communications infrastructures to make InfoWars. So it's going to be a very interesting set of papers on rhetorics of conspiracy theory, which has been kind of understudied, and I think will be very important.
And our final section here is conspiracy theories in the global village. So this is where we find a number of papers addressing the similar issues in the information society from around the globe. So one of these chapters in particular refers to violence and political turbulence in Turkey, and the in reference to the Cold War. So in this chapter, the authors will be integrating historiography, memory studies, and digital ethnography to show how Cold War anxieties and the traumas of the 1970s are being visually reanimated to shape contemporary conspiracist worldviews. And another chapter in the same section will take a broader approach to analyze patterns of conspiratorial beliefs across different countries using qualitative and quantitative methods to show how these belief patterns can exist across different cultures that don't necessarily overlap at all, in order to deepen the sociological understanding of how high tension beliefs function, drawing on a multicultural data set with cross-national measures of belief and trust. The idea here is to speak to the underlying structure of conspiratorial thinking, characterize its general features, and examine how these beliefs take different forms across cultures and natural contexts.
So just to wrap up, and we're getting low on time, and I want to leave time for people to ask questions. You know, the main point of this book is to try to figure out a way to navigate information disorder in a world that's increasingly disordered, in which information is no longer necessarily something we can trust, in which our leaders and elected officials share mis and disinformation and conspiracy theories at large, and in which we're increasingly being circumscribed in what we can read and see by large platforms and tech companies who have their own vested interests in, certain narratives and certain stories. So the main point of this project is to bring together a lot of different scholars to get them into conversation about what we see as the central challenges facing democracy in the information society. Anything you wanted to add, Robert?
Yeah, I think that's a great wrap up. Thank you.
So why don't we turn it over to you, and we'd love to hear any questions or comments you might have.
Yes, let's thank our presenters. Thank you so much. That was a wonderful talk, really interesting. And then if people have questions, you can either pop on or you can ask them in the chat and I will convey them. I guess I have a question that get us started, which is, so I was thinking about given what you say that we live in this sort of disordered world right now, right? Uh, Do you think that solutions are sort of like that individuals or groups have to sort of organize themselves to, uh, sort of address these sort of information challenges? Or do you think that it feels like we can't necessarily trust that there will be societal solutions forthcoming, but I kind of wondered, where do you guys fall out, or do you think it's some combination of all those things?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's one that's really been troubling me for many years now since I started looking into the QAnon research community. And I'm sorry to say I don't really have an answer. I mean, on the one hand, I think that a lot of people will always say, well, we need these platforms to deplatform conspiracy theories. And like on the surface, I think probably that wouldn't really hurt society to do that. On the other hand, I don't really want to live in a world where the only thing deciding whether we can talk about a topic is whether or not Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk has decided that it's something we can talk about. There are a lot of topics that are politically sensitive, but are not conspiracy theories. And then there are a lot of topics that are conspiracy theories that are just sort of thrown around by politicians and government officials and things. So it's a really tough question. I do feel like at the end of the day, we need to develop some kind of civics literacy approach where we talk about what it means to be a citizen in a democracy and what it means to both protect freedom of speech, but also to wield it with respect and with judgment. but that's a really tough thing to do. I don't think the universities can fix it, unfortunately, because one of the great things about conspiracy theories is that anyone that opposes you or challenges you just becomes part of the conspiracy. And academics in particular are really the target of a lot of conspiracy theories right now.
Right. Yeah.
Robert, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, no, I mean, I was going to add just kind of a different layer to that answer, which is that, I think the, I don't think there's really a broad social way to help kind of eliminate these things, but that a lot of the
Mhm.
time, belief in conspiracy theories and the mindset that lends itself to these things is one of kind of alienation, and that, if people were to find better ways of relating to each other and working to create bridges that will help, not cure but guide these ways of thinking into healthier directions, that would stem the tide a little bit, a little bit at a time, of people adhering to extremist views and going down rabbit holes that seem more appealing because they don't have another outlet perhaps in their lives to think their own thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a question in the chat that probably is for you, Robert, which is well, either of you, but is are there were there authors in the book, or are you yourselves thinking about sort of the history of distrust in medicine as part of this equation, right? So they're saying, like the Tuskegee syphilis study, right?
Mhm.
It's sort of, this distrust is intertwined with these ideas of conspiracy in medicine. And so has anyone looked at that, or is that something you guys look at?
I mean, I can't think of a specific chapter that addresses that directly. It's definitely an ingredient that's spread out over several of these contributions. Um, but I can't recall when that directly addresses it as the main subject of their writing.
Yeah, sure. Um, let's see. There's a couple more questions. So I'm curious what is the emotional core is of this conspiracy theory trend? Like, why are people seeking this out and participating in this? And is this something that
So,
you've looked at?
yeah.
And I think you have.
Yeah, that's a great question, and shout out to Jules, who's one of my colleagues here at UW. Um, so Jules, you can always come by the office and we'll just riff on it. But to talk more about it, I mean, Jen Howie and I did some work on this where we really tried to assess, like, what if we removed the idea of critical thinking as the essential aspect of helping people get out of conspiracy theories, and what if we focused instead on some, mindfulness or thinking through how you respond to conspiracy theories emotionally. Like, what are they trying to get you to do? Why do they want you to feel this way? And I think that part of that research that was really interesting is that, we really were asking the question, like, why are people doing this? And I think there's a lot of reasons that we could get into. One is that the media infrastructure in the United States, really since the 1970s, has moved towards ever more extreme positions, so that your enemies are always going to be evil monsters. We got rid of the fairness doctrine where we had to like have two different sides of every debate on, television. So you see the rise of these sort of opinion channels where it's like you should always be angry and you should always be afraid. And I think conspiracy theories play on the same emotional register, but they add on to it like, yeah, you should be angry and afraid. And also, if you do your own research, you'll also be smarter than everyone. So isn't that great? You can be angry and smarter than everybody at the same time. And that feels really powerful if you feel helpless under, whatever's going on in the world. And you say, well, yeah, but I know that it's, the Jews, or I know that it's the globalists who are doing all the problems, making all of this stuff happen. Then you really feel important and you feel like you have a channel for that rage. And that's really tough to, like one of the reasons I'm thinking about capitalism, it's like, how do we tell people, no, you should be angry at like these capitalistic, economic systems that are making you so fraught and, making your life so hard. But that's really not as attractive as I should be angry at this group. So that's one sort of small answer, but there's a lot more. I mean, you could do a whole history of the way that we've really trained audiences in the United States in particular to always be angry and afraid. I think there's a lot there.
Yeah. Well, maybe we have time for one more question, and of course, it's not an easy question either. But someone writes, "What are the implications for intellectual freedom?" Right, and sort of this thinking about, well, who decides what is a conspiracy theory, I think, is part of the
Yep.
equation.
That's a great, great question. Robert, do you know the
Yeah,
answer to that? No, I'm just kidding.
yeah, I've got it in my back pocket here, I mean,
Um,
that's
Go
one of
ahead. Go ahead.
those huge $1 million questions and
I guess
studying conspiracy
you
theories.
could limit it by saying like, how have you thought about that in your own work, right? I'm sure it comes up as something that you have to think about
Hmm.
constructing a project.
I call it the ancient aliens paradox, where, if you remember that show, they would always say, well, what if it were true? There's a moment in conspiracy theory where you jump from a conspiracy fact to a conspiracy theory, and I call that moment of what if it were true. And so one of the things that's really tricky, and I have a hard time when I teach conspiracy theories, because I'm definitely not trying to leave the students more paranoid than they came in. But, one of the things we talk about is, how do we identify that leap? Can we articulate where it happens? And so I will show them examples where somebody starts out with a reasonable interpretation of something, like, in QAnon, for example, will
Hmm.
say, well, the CIA is corrupt. Yeah, okay, that's reasonable. We could maybe agree to disagree, but most people probably think that's right. But that doesn't mean that they're controlling your mind. And there's a leap there that happens. It's like, well, if this is true, then this must be true. And so I try to show that happens, and I give them examples where it kind of is very slippery, and where people start out
Hmm.
reasonably, but then turn to these sort of paranoid interpretations.
Yeah, yeah, great.
Yes, exactly.
I want to thank everyone for attending our Ideals speaker series. And I also want to, of course, thank Matt and Robert. I think your presentation was fantastic. And of course, it's the things that we're all thinking about these days. So thank you so much for what you shared with us today.
Well, thank you for having us.
Thank you, Clarence and Rachel.